Technical difficulties worked out here. I'm trying to stream to the Lindell Recovery Network. Check 1, 2, testing 1, 2, mic check, testing. Check 1, 2. Hey, everybody. I'm Melissa Huray, the director of the Lindell Recovery Network, co-host of the Hope Report, which streams live Monday through Friday at noon Eastern with Jason Perry. I wanted to start coming on here to the Lindell Recovery Network and sharing some content, and I'll see how it goes. I'll see if it generates some interest and some action and some comments and some interaction, but we'll see if we can get something going here maybe once or twice a week. I'd like to just share different things I've learned over 20 years of sobriety. I'm coming up on my 20-year birthday, I guess you could say, of not drinking. And on August 22nd, 2 decades of not drinking. And over those years, right the last day that I drank, or I guess you could say the last night I drank, the next day, the Lord delivered me of mental obsession, of craving, of compulsion. All of that was lifted off me rather dramatically. But I did have a long road to walk in terms of many other issues that I continued to struggle with and battle. Because in AA, they might be called character defects, or things from the past, could be residual trauma, unhealthy patterns learned in family of origin, or different things you've experienced in life. So it has taken many, many years. And I wouldn't say that I'm there yet, but I've continued to journey with the Lord through ups and downs, highs and lows of life. And He's taught me many things over the years, and He's been faithfully by my side. And really what I wanted to do was just share some of the past 20 years with you. So what I've been thinking about a lot lately is gratitude. I once saw a billboard that said, "Gratitude is the secret to unlocking all of life's doors." And I really, really believe that. I believe gratitude is the antidote to many problems that we face. So I wanted to focus on that a little bit, because as I'm setting this up, teeing this up, like I said to you, I had a pretty miraculous deliverance from addiction after spending 15 years blackout binge drinking. I was trying to stop for about 4 years, from 1999 to 2003, when I eventually did stop for good. I spent time going back and forth, as many of us do when we're trying to figure something out, or maybe we're trying to determine if that thing can be in our life. We could do this in a lot of areas. We do it maybe with relationships, or with a job you struggle with where you're not sure. In treatment or in counseling, we can refer to this in one way as the stages of change, that it's a normal process that we go through as we are trying to sort out what if we want to make a change in our lives. And I started thinking I really needed to quit drinking when I was around 26, although I had had a lot of periods before that where I had moments of clarity and I had deep conviction. And I always had a lot of shame about my abuse of alcohol and really the aftermath of it. But in spite of that, I kept going back and trying to find a way to make it work, trying to find a way to do it responsibly, because probably 90% or so of the world drinks responsibly, where it doesn't become a problem, or it doesn't destroy their life, or they're able to do it and enjoy it and then have a functional life. And that was always my quest, was to try to find a way to have alcohol and also have a functional life. And over the trials and errors of that, it became very clear to me that that was impossible for somebody like me. And many of us with problems, we know this intuitively and deeply, but we don't want to accept the reality of it, I guess. And I didn't want to accept that I had to close the door to alcohol for good. So I continued to go back and try to find a way to make it work. The big book of Alcoholics Anonymous talks about this, trying to drink like a gentleman, trying to moderate, trying in spite of so many failed attempts. And that's one of the hallmarks of addiction, really, is repeated failed attempts to stop doing something. So over the years of being an addiction counselor, that's one of the tests I will suggest to people who are struggling or contemplating, do I need to stop drinking or drugging, or can I find a way to do it socially? If you can honestly say to yourself, my use does not impact me negatively, I do it and I enjoy it, it adds to my life. We often hear about people who they have a beer at a ball game or they have a drink at dinner, something like that, where it's casual, it's social, it enhances life experiences. It's not pathological. It's not something that you battle with where you're constantly hating yourself for the places that it takes you. You should be, if you aren't BSing yourself, it should be fairly easy to know if this is something you need to stop doing. And even though I knew that I should stop, I can continue to try find a way to make it work. So that brings me to 1999. I got arrested for drunk driving twice in 1 year. The first time was in January, and I didn't really change much. I just rationalized it. I enlisted the advice of people who I knew would support me continuing to drink, which is also what we do when we want to reinforce a behavior, or we want an alibi, as I heard Jason say the other day. We'll seek out people who live like we do. So I got the advice that I wanted. People told me, you're not that bad. You just need to slow down. You need to be careful. And so I didn't drink and drive for about 4 days, or I didn't drink for about 4 days. And then I decided I could find a way. I told myself drinking and driving wasn't my problem, or drinking wasn't my problem. Drinking and driving was my problem. So then I set a new set of rules into place with myself. I said, I'm not going to drink and drive anymore. But that would never last, because once I started ingesting alcohol, my ability to make rational decisions disappeared. So I slowly was back into that old cycle. I call it getting back on the highway to hell, because that's what it was for me. I wasn't a daily drinker, but when I would drink, it would be reckless, pathological, compulsive, and it would keep going in spite of, need to be somewhere, need to be to work in the morning. Just everything else would be thrown to the wind when I started drinking. So inevitably, I got another DUI, and 8 months later, in August of that year. So that was the first thing that put the brakes on my drinking for a year and a half. I stopped for a year and a half. But in the back of my mind, I knew that I wasn't done and I hadn't committed to stopping for good. I just thought, I will put this aside for a while. I want my life to straighten out, and I'm going to, mellow out on the drinking. But I knew that I wasn't done. I knew that I was going to ultimately return to it. So I went through all the things I was told to do. I was very dutiful. I went to an outpatient treatment that was really nothing really clinical about it. It was really just people sitting around talking, and I made some friends there, and I think I did get some introduction to, really in collaborating or hearing other people's stories was powerful. And I did take some good things away from that. But again, without my willingness, none of this was going to work. Without my complete commitment to do it, it wasn't going to work. That's why I firmly believe that, addicts and alcoholics need to be willing. They need to at least be somewhat willing to do a new thing. So at the end of the 18 months, my mind started to slip into the place of that I wasn't that bad. And I started to think maybe I could drink again, and this time it wouldn't cause me harm. And I just started to think like that. And now I really see the spiritual warfare that was going on, and the enemy attacking my mind and trying to tell me that it would be different now just because I had taken such a long break. And I could just pat myself on the back for having 18 months without drinking. And wasn't that, I'm so great that I did this. So again, I attributed all of my success to my own power. I did not give God any credit for anything. I didn't think that I needed him at all. I thought that I could figure this out in my own power. I thought I was smarter than everybody else, that I wouldn't fall back into those bad habits again. And I really thought since I was making a conscious decision to drink again, that it was gonna be different because I was doing it rationally and responsibly. So, 2001, I decided to start drinking again, and when I say decided to, it was a choice. Every time that I chose to pick up a drink, I had the option to do something different, but I chose to, start again. And once I was back into it, it was very quickly into the same old pattern of drinking, blacking out, drunk driving, recklessness, near overdose, all of those things. And it would take me another 2 years, 2.5 years to get out of that. And I think back on those times and I am just overwhelmed with gratitude for the Lord sparing me so many things that could have happened to me, so many things, so many nights that could have taken my life of the drinking to the point of overdose, the accidents I would have, falling downstairs, falling in swamps, falling in ditches, passing out in places, waking up in strange places. I won't even get into the amount of, uh, the things that could have happened to me just when I was blacked out of my mind. So that went on for a year and a half or 2.5 years once I resumed drinking again. And in the fall of 2002, my father started to get really sick again from his chronic alcohol abuse that had been going on for many, many years. He first tried to quit drinking I was in high school, and I wouldn't even say he tried really. I mean, people forced him to, or he was forced to go to treatment, and he never wanted to. He never acknowledged really that he had a problem. I had never heard him say, "I want to stop. I don't want to live like this." And he eventually passed away. And I say that to illustrate that after my dad died, things changed for me dramatically. It was like something moved in the supernatural realm where God started stepping up his pursuits of me. And I could no longer, I just had a dramatic descent into destruction where my dad died and he was 54. He was fairly young. He's 4 years older than I am right now. And I looked at him in his hospital bed in a coma that he wouldn't recover from. And I said to myself, I'm never going to drink again. And I vowed as I watched my father in his hospital bed that I was never going to drink again. And I stuck to that for a couple weeks. And it was just like a switch would flip in my mind where I would be completely fine. I would be committed to I'm not drinking, and then a switch would flip and I would get this idea that things were going to be different. And I would really believe it. I would really be convinced that this time it's going to be different. And here's why. Because I'm only going to have this much and I'm going to only have it over this period of time and I'm going to stop at this time. And it was never ever different. It was always a blackout, regret, shame, waking up with panic and just in withdrawal, sweating and panicking because I can't remember what happened or where I was or how I got home. So I'm illustrating the severity of this to show you that nothing other than something supernatural could have helped me because I had tried all the things. I tried AA meetings, I tried different therapists, medications, antidepressants. I didn't go to an inpatient treatment. I just went to that one outpatient, but I was always trying different things of the world to help me with my problem and just trying to understand why couldn't I change? But I didn't really want to change. I wanted to keep drinking. I wanted to keep drinking, but just in a way that wouldn't destroy me. And until I accepted that that was impossible, nothing was ever going to get better. So after my dad died, I had 6 more relapses, each one more devastating than the one before, and each one would chip away more of my soul, more of my self-respect, more of my hope. And I started to beg God. I started to cry out to him, even though I had known him since I was a child. I hadn't been pursuing a relationship with him for many years, except in times of crisis, like many addicts will do, just crying out, "Help me. Don't let me get oh, there's a cop behind me. Don't let me get pulled over." I would just have crisis prayers, but there was nothing genuine. My heart was still set on finding a way to drink responsibly. I was not surrendered. That was one thing that I refused to do was to surrender to God, to surrender to the only one who could help me. And instead I pursued everything else, everything, every man-made thing, every expert, And I'm grateful for those things. I do think they have a place in recovery. I think that clinical interventions and Christian therapists and medications, all these things do have a place in recovery, but I was seeking it all backwards. I was not acknowledging God and his power and his ability to save me. I was just looking to the things of man. So I came to the last time I drank on August 21st, 2003, and I came out of a 12-hour blackout, and I had one hell of a night, for lack of a better word. I woke up in a strange place. I didn't know how I'd gotten there. The last thing I remembered was being at the Minnesota State Fair, and it was like sunset, and now it was 12 hours later, and didn't have any idea what had happened. I was in withdrawal. I was sick. I was bruised and battered. I had unexplained bruises and things all over my body. And that morning, I just cried out to God and I begged him to help me never drink again. And that was my only prayer, really, in that moment, was a desperate prayer. It was that everything I have tried has failed, and I want you to come and take over. And I surrendered and I repented. I wanted to be done. I wanted to be done more than anything I had ever wanted in my entire life. I never wanted to touch a drink again. So that morning, while walking the fairgrounds looking for my abandoned car or my car that had been towed, walking around in alcohol withdrawal, just sick and miserable and disheveled, stumbling around half drunk still, I just begged God to never let me drink again. And he heard that prayer and he answered it and he met me with his grace. Only when I completely surrendered, emptied myself, and became willing to let him take over was I able to be free of my addiction. Now, that was the first part. That was delivering me of the crippling obsession, the craving, the mental preoccupation, all of that stuff was removed and lifted. And it has not returned since in the past 20 years. But I've continued to battle other things like fear of man and indecision, low self-worth, struggling with comparing myself to others, struggling with uh, lack of faith, just lots of different things. And that was a long introduction leading up to that gratitude is really the antidote to much of these things. So that's what I've been focused on again, is coming back to gratitude. 12 years ago, I read a really, really good book. It's a popular book by an artist or author you may have heard of. Her name is Melody Beattie. She also wrote the book Codependent No More, which is one of the best-selling self-help books of all time. And I read that book actually 12 years ago when I was going through a terrible time in my marriage. And at the time, I didn't realize how codependent I really was. And that book set me free of many things. And it's a book that I continue to refer to. She also wrote a book called Making Miracles Happen in 40 Days. I kind of resist the title a little. It sounds new agey. It's something that I would really approach cautiously now after dabbling into the new age movement years ago. And I was captivated by law of attraction and the secret and some of those things just briefly before the Lord, pulled me back and said, hey, no, I want you to be careful of that. But she wrote the book, Making Miracles Happen in 40 Days. And for some reason, it came to my mind a few days ago. So I downloaded it on Audible. And she has a different spin on gratitude. I mean, most people have heard of making a gratitude list, and that's always a good practice to get into, to focus and get your mind tuned to all of the blessings that you already have instead of contemplating what you don't like, complaining. This book takes it a step further, where it suggests that you actually express gratitude for the things you don't like, the things in your life that you wish were different, that you struggle with, that you can't seem to change, that you've prayed about, but yet they persist, that you've talked about till you're blue in the face and still they don't change. Those are the kind of things that she's suggesting you express gratitude for. And I thought, this is a good time for me to pull this book back out. And I really believe the Holy Spirit had quickened my spirit to that because I hadn't thought about it for years. And it was like, no, I want you to take a look at this again. You could really use a refresher in gratitude, my friend. So I picked it up again and I started just thinking in terms of my addiction, just in terms of 20 years. It's easy to just gloss over that. Oh, wow, I've been sober for 20 years. But when I think back and look at the battle The enemy had wanted to take me out, and the bloody battle that it took. And I'm not saying I did anything. I'm actually so grateful that God never gave up on me. I should have died so many times. I should not even be here. And yet he spared my life. So to even be alive and breathing and have more days to walk the earth, that he gave me an extension on my life, like he did to King Hezekiah in the Bible. There's so many nights I shouldn't have woke up. I mean, so many days I shouldn't have woke up. So thinking how grateful I am when I think of friends of mine who died in their addictions and many clients that I worked with over my 15 years as a addiction counselor, all the clients that were lost. And I was just cleaning out my desk yesterday. I found a Post-it and I had written names of all the clients I had worked with in the 2 years before I left the job I was at before I came to work for Mike Lindell. There were 10 people who died, who I had worked with, who I had spent many hours with, who I thought were serious about recovery. And for different reasons, it ended up taking their life. So I think of how grateful I am that the Lord spared me. So I sat down after reading that book and I made a list of all the things that I complain about. And one on the top of the list is complaining about Minnesota, complaining about this state, complaining about living here, and I look around, I'm like, wow, you have a beautiful place to live. You have a great yard. You have so many things to be thankful for, yet you sit and complain that you have to live here. So one of the quotes I wanted to share from Melody Beattie is really good. Gratitude unlocks the fullness of life. It turns what we have into enough and more. It turns denial into acceptance, chaos to order, and confusion into clarity. It can turn a meal into a feast, a house into a home, a stranger into a friend. Gratitude makes sense of our past, brings peace for today, and creates a vision for tomorrow. And that just made me think of the good old serenity prayer. And I've shared with some of you that I did spend some time in AA. I spent time in AA from between 1999 and 2003, kind of bouncing in and out of there. And I usually had many complaints about it. Although I did meet a lot of really great people, I had some great sponsors, and then I had a lot of complaints. And I think it's just a matter of what I was focusing on. But the serenity prayer, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I mean, that just says it all right there. It's discerning, it's praying for wisdom and discernment, for courage to change the things that we can. It's not about inaction. It's not about sitting on your hands and waiting for God to do everything. It's about courage to step out and do what God is asking you to do, but also knowing when the time is not right for that and when you may need to wait, when you need to exercise patience, when you need to have grace for people who maybe aren't ready to go where you want them to go yet. And the only way that can come is through wisdom and discernment and praying for that. So shifting your perspective can have a dramatic impact on your life. Stop talking negatively about people and situations. Vent only to God. So a few other notes I made this morning. I told you this at the beginning, but gratitude and thankfulness are the keys to opening all of life's doors. The Bible says that God inhabits the praises of his people. So almost every morning, I try to start the morning by singing. I start singing to God. And it's not always hymns, but it's a song. You know, anything can be godly when it's done for his glory. You know, whatever you do, do it for the glory of the Lord. And I'll start singing a song and I'll think about it being directed to God in praise. And it starts to lift my mood almost immediately. I start to praise him and thank him. And I start to just go through my mind about, I woke up today. And I mentioned this on the Hope Report today, one of my prayers of surrender that I've been doing, even if I do nothing else, even if I didn't read the Bible as long as I wanted, or I didn't pray in tongues for 15 minutes like I said I was going to. You know, it's so easy for us to let the enemy condemn us and to feel that we didn't do enough and we just don't measure up. But instead of that, I've been surrendering. Lord, I surrender everything to you. and ask your help with willingness, obedience, and the desire to follow you. I invite you to override my free will choices and for you to do whatever is necessary to bring me into alignment with you. Please take my will and mold it to yours. And that's my prayer of surrender, that I will get spun out in my mind and fearful if I start to think that, um, you know, if I'm in a situation and I'm not liking being in it or I'm resisting it. Resistance is another problem that Melody Beattie talks about that I made a few notes about. Where did they go? Oh, yeah. But if I can honestly surrender and say to God, hey, good morning, Lord. What are we doing today? This is your day. I'm yours. I'm your vessel. Take me where you want me to go. Let me meet who you want me to meet. Tell me what you want me to say and help me to partner with you and obey in every way. If I pray that and I believe and I trust that he heard it and he's doing it, then I don't need to stress about wherever I find myself during the day. I just need to remember to come back to surrender whenever I am getting back into trying to control things, struggling. When you feel the emotions of struggle and resistance, it's another indicator that you need to surrender. Surrender it to God. If something is not going your way, say you're sitting somewhere and you're like, I don't really want to be here. How did I even get here? Surrender it to God and he will use it for his purposes. Maybe there's somebody there he wants you to meet. There's somebody you need to speak into their life. There's a reason why you're there. So trust that. Trust that if you pray that prayer of surrender, he's going to get you where you need to be and he will use you for his purposes. So resistance blocks our power. Instead, accept what is with gratitude. Thank you for this moment, Lord. Thank you that the sun is shining, that the sun is out. It's a nice day. I'm breathing. I can walk. I have eyesight. So in the book, Melody Beattie talks about, she lists of all the things she complained about. I mentioned Minnesota, or I mentioned, my kids being in the public school system. I can get spun out on that. Then I look back on my life and all the things that I prayed about. There are many things I had to wait on, but God always faithfully opened a door or moved me when the time was right. And some of the things that happened was moving from my hometown to here, leaving the TV station I was at, leaving my previous job to work for Mike Lindell, even when he came and saved my marriage. It was in moments where I felt helpless to do anything else, where I surrendered it to God and I trusted him that he was going to move on my behalf. But I needed to be patient and to trust that he would show me the next move. And Jason, my co-host on the Hope Report, he always talks about doing the next right thing. It's another thing you can do anytime you're struggling, you feel negative emotions coming in, you're resisting something that's happening in your life. Maybe you're having a conflict with somebody, or you're just frustrated about where your life is at that current moment. Surrender it to God and ask him to show you the next right thing, and he faithfully will. And just keep it that simple. Just boil it down. So the more that you can focus your life and ground it in gratitude and get into a habit of doing that, it really changes your perspective. And I'm telling you, I was doing it all weekend because I get so bogged down with thinking of living in a blue state and so oppressive. And oh, I hate the politics here. The more I ruminate on that, the worse my mood becomes. My mood starts to deteriorate. I start to get snappy and irritable with the people around me. When I see that there's nothing I can do about that right now. God might open a door tomorrow. He might open a door next week. But presently, there's nothing that I can do about some of the things that I'm frustrated about. But what I can do is change my attitude, change my outlook, and start to praise God for what I already have, which is a lot to be grateful for. And I'm sure all of you can relate. I mean, no matter what's going on in your life, there are things that you can look around and see how blessed you are. And another thing to do is to look back on the times that God has come through for you, and look back at the times that he has faithfully come through and delivered you, even, and when you had to maybe walk through a season that was difficult. When my marriage was on the rocks, it took 1.5 years for that to resolve. It was 1.5 years of pain and struggle and unknown, and where I had to completely lean on God. So God is using you and refining you in those times where you don't understand, you're struggling, you don't know, why is this happening? God, don't you hear me? Why aren't you acting? He is refining you, and he is teaching you to draw near to him and to rely only on him. because that's where I always got into problems in my life. I made other things an idol. I made alcohol an idol. I made my husband an idol. I've made jobs an idol. I've made wanting to be recognized an idol. And God had to strip me of that. And my pastor friend Rafe always says, humble yourself or God will humble you. But just know that the second way is much more painful. So humble yourself. God doesn't want to be second best, and trust him. Trust him that he's going to work out the details in your life. And he always, um, he inhabits our praises, and he wants us to have an attitude of thanksgiving. I mean, look at the Apostle Paul. He's praising God from a prison cell half the time. He's saying to live is Christ and to die is gain. Think about Paul. I mean, reading Philippians can be really encouraging when you're going through something and read about some of the stuff that Paul went through. Another way to help yourself is to get out of your own head and your own issues and get in, do something for somebody else. Pray for them. Go help them with something they need. Go volunteer. Go serve at your church. Whatever you can do to get out of your own. These are things I'm applying to myself. I'm not telling you need to do them, but the same applies to me. That it just helps you get into that gratitude mindset, doing something for somebody else. So I hope this helped you today. Please leave me a comment if there are different things you'd like. Maybe I could come on here and chat about relating to recovery topics and what might be helpful for those of you in here who are either struggling with quitting, or maybe you're newly sober, or you've been sober, or maybe you have a family member who struggles with an addiction. I'd love to speak to any topics you think might be helpful. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I hope you join us for the Hope Report tomorrow at noon Central Time.